Well, good morning and happy Easter. Let's try that again. Happy Easter. All right, that's good. It is so good to have you here today. My name is Dale, and if you are here, especially with us for the first time, whether it's here in the room or online, we just want to let you know how glad we are that you are celebrating Easter with us today. As we start this morning, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever been lost? Not like I got turned around in the grocery store or I missed a turn, but like flat out, I have no idea where I am lost. Anyone willing to admit to that today? A lot more ladies than guys, because guys, we're not supposed to admit that we're lost, right? So at least for me, I can at least admit I've been on the verge of being lost. How's that? On the verge of being lost. One of those times was when Tani and I were first married. We went on a ski retreat weekend. Now, this was cross-country skiing at a retreat center that I had kind of grown up at, and I knew my way around, and I'd been there for summer camp and other retreats. But this time, it was different because it was bitterly, bitterly cold that weekend. The high temperatures throughout the weekend were well below zero, and the temperatures and the wind chills at night were down, getting into dangerous kind of territory. But we went, and we had a couple who went with us. They were friends, and even though some people decided they'd just stay in the lodge and watch the cold, we thought, hey, we have paid to come skiing, so we are going to go skiing. So we got our skis, and we went up the hill behind the lodge, and there was a big trail at the top of the hill. And we just turned on that trail and started skiing. And we figured, well, eventually we'll come to a trail that comes back down the hill, and that'll take us back to the lodge. And we kept going, and we kept going, and we never found that trail that we thought might be there. And so after a while, the sun is starting to fade a little bit in the sky. We decide, okay, wherever we can get down the hill. So we found, I don't know if it was a deer path or a little stream, something like that was all dried up. We had to take off our skis and walk down there. And then we got to the bottom of the hill and we started skiing, but it was taking a lot longer than we expected. In fact, we got to the point where every time we could see a break in the trees or a curve in the path, we would think the lodge has to be right there. The lodge was never right there. It just didn't work that way that day. And so as the sun was finally sinking out of the sky and the winds were picking up for the night, we finally got back to the lodge, and it was good to be there. It was an unexpected adventure for us. And really, if we had been out a little bit longer, we might have actually been in some trouble. Now, people end up in unexpected situations or having challenges that are unexpected all the time. This was another cold winter, and so people in places like Texas, where they're not used to the cold, they had some severe challenges this winter. But even people who are used to the cold had some problems. On February 23rd of this year, there was a couple in Ontario, Canada, who decided to go for an ice hike. Now, I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up. It means that you go out for a hike on the ice on a frozen lake. Now, the lake they happened to choose was Lake Huron, one of the Great Lakes. And they went out for the day, and everything was good. There were some people on shore as they set out, and they could see them for a while. And finally, this young couple went so far that they could no longer see them. But they saw a problem. The ice separated from the shore and began to drift away. Now, the people on shore didn't know what to do because they couldn't call out to the people who were out on the ice, and so they did the only thing they could. They called emergency services. Fortunately, there was a Canadian Forces C-130 that was in the area, and they were able to start searching for the hikers that were out on the ice. And at the same time, they were trying to figure out how they would get in contact with them. And so authorities used the license plate number to track down who it was that was out there. Finally, the plane located them, and when the plane saw them, they were just sitting there chilling on the ice. And by that time, they had worked out who it was. They got their cell phone numbers, and they called them, and they said, "Do you realize the predicament that you're in?" And they said, "What predicament? We're out for a hike. We're just enjoying ourselves." And the person on the other end of the phone said, "Let me explain to you where you're at. You are now 3 kilometers, that's 2 miles offshore. There's no way back. If you are extremely lucky, in another few miles, your ice flow is going to run into a narrow spit of land. However, if you go just a few degrees to the east, you're going to end up in Georgian Bay, and the nearest land there is 50 miles away. If you go slightly to the west, you're going to be into Lake Huron, and the nearest land there is 75 miles away. I think you better just sit tight while we send a chopper to come and get you." And so they had to send a helicopter out to lift this couple off the ice and bring them back to safety. The whole time, they were oblivious. They had no idea that their hope was drifting away. Whether they knew it or not, they needed help big time. Now, maybe you've never been stuck on breakaway ice drifting aimlessly across a Great Lake. Maybe you have, I don't know. But we all have been in unexpected places in life. We know what it's like, whether it's living through a pandemic over the last year or one of the million other crazy turns of life that happens and that we can experience. We all know what it's like to be somewhere that we didn't expect. Now, this idea of unexpected challenges, that's not new to us. It's been happening through human history. And in fact, the Bible is filled with many stories of where things sometimes go sideways. And so today, we're going to take an in-depth look at one of those. It's what happened to someone at the very first Easter. And it's a woman named Mary Magdalene. Now, Mary, we first meet her back in Luke chapter 8, when we read about Jesus' early ministry. As he and the disciples are beginning to engage in ministry, it tells us that Mary is one of a number of women who travel with and support Jesus and the disciples. And it also tells us why she might do that. Because Mary experienced a miraculous healing by Jesus' power. And so it would seem that out of gratitude, she traveled with Jesus and supported his ministry. Her name tells us a little bit more about her. It means that she's from the town of Magdala. Magdala means castle or tower. And it was a town on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And so there was a thriving fishing industry in that town, but it was also noted for textiles and dyes. It was a very thriving, happening place. And so we can infer, because Mary comes from Magdala and because she's free to travel with Jesus and support him, that she has some financial resources. But here's the thing. Mary's not just a follower. Mary's a leader. There are times where she is listed with other women in the Bible, and she's always listed first, and that tells us that she was the leader. Beyond that, she was one of the most faithful followers, maybe the most faithful follower of Jesus. Her name is mentioned in the Gospels 14 times. That's in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We read her name 14 times, which is more than most of the 12 disciples. So she might just be the most faithful follower that Jesus has. She's with him and the disciples. She's supporting them. And that's through their years of ministry. But also, as it comes to the end, Mary is still faithful. Some of the other disciples have faded to the margins of the story. They're watching from the outskirts, and some of them have run away in fear. But Mary is there to the end, through the crucifixion and the burial. In fact, it's been said of Mary that no woman superseded Mary in her utter devotion to the Master. And yet, despite being the most faithful follower, despite being a leader, despite the faith that would have come from experiencing this miraculous healing, In today's passage, we find Mary in a very unexpected place. She's unsure of what's happening. If you have your Bible or app with you today, I'd invite you to join me in John chapter 20. If you don't have it with you, no worries. It'll be on the screen, and you can simply follow along there. Now, I think many of us can identify with Mary. We've been on this journey of life, and we're trying to get things arranged. We're trying to take care of other people. And sometimes we get this idea that if we get things all set, if we just arrange the right financial resources, if we're following Jesus in the right way, if we get everything arranged just the way it should be, that everything's going to be just right, just the way we wanted it, just the way we dreamed or imagined. And sometimes it is. And sometimes life smacks us in the face. And we can end up in an unexpected place. And sometimes when the circumstances are bad enough, we can start to lose hope because of the unexpected. And I think that's what's going on with Mary, because along with the rest of the disciples just 1 week earlier, Mary has been on this journey with Jesus and the disciples to Jerusalem. The crowds are welcoming Jesus as the king, and they have these great expectations that Jesus is somehow going to displace the invading Romans, or at least he's going to be elevated to his rightful position of leadership for the Jewish people. But over the course of a week, it all goes sideways. It starts with the crowds cheering, and then day by day, Jesus goes to the temple and he teaches, and the crowds love it. They can sense and know that this is someone who's teaching with power and authority. But the religious leaders, they're getting pretty annoyed with Jesus. They're jealous of him. They don't like him. They want him to go away. And so they start trying to trap him in his words, people testing him. But that doesn't work. And so they try to get Jesus to say something bad about the Romans so that they could get the Roman soldiers to come and do their dirty work and get rid of Jesus. That doesn't work either. And so they go out with a mob in the middle of the night with torches. They arrest him for religious crimes. And then they turn him over to the Romans and they demand that Jesus be killed. Can you imagine the roller coaster of emotions that Mary Magdalene has been on through this week? Jesus the King coming to Jerusalem, and it just fades away as he's arrested, a sham of a trial, beaten, tortured, crucified, and buried. Right before we start John chapter 20, at the end of chapter 19, the last thing that happens there is that Jesus' bloody body is taken down from the cross after he dies. And there's a man named Joseph who says, "Can I care for him?" And he takes Jesus' body and he lays it in a tomb. And because it's late in the evening, they roll a heavy stone in front of it so that no one will mess with it. And that's where we pick up the story in John chapter 20. It says, "Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved." That's John. That's how John describes himself. So she goes running to Peter and John and says, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." You see, Mary is eager. She gets up before sunrise. She's searching for Jesus. She's on her way to the tomb. She's probably going to prepare his body for a proper burial. Or at the very least, she's going to express her grief at losing her teacher and her friend. But she gets there and the tomb is empty. The stone has been rolled away. And so she runs to tell Peter and John what had happened. Peter and John were leaders of the disciples, and so she runs to them. But it's not just a news report. Sure, she wants to share what she's seen, but she's trying to process what's going on, what's happened. My expectations, it's not lining up. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to make of this. And so it tells us that Peter and John go running off to the tomb, and they look in, and indeed the tomb is empty. They verify Mary's report. But then it tells us that they return home to the place where they were staying, but not Mary. Mary presses on, picking up in verse 11. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. She goes back. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. Jesus asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will get him." Mary models something for us here that is so important in life. Mary is very real with her circumstances and her emotions. This is a healthy approach. She's in an unexpected place. Unexpected things are happening. She doesn't know what to make of it, but she's very real with the circumstances that she's in, with the emotions that she's trying to process. She's in such a place of grief. Can you relate to that? Have you ever lost someone in your life? Or maybe you've lost what you've most depended on: a job, a relationship, a spouse, security, maybe parents, friends. Mary is in this raw stage of grief, and it's too easy to forget the journey that she's been on from these great expectations as they come to Jerusalem. Jesus is king, and now even the body is missing. Even her hope to grieve Jesus has been taken away. Her hope is crushed. Is life so crazy that the gardener has taken the body and put it somewhere and now we can't find it? Even her last shred of hope has been destroyed. And then, Mary's experiencing the worst moment of her life. And then, hope is gone. The body is missing. She's alone. Peter and John have run off. She's there trying to process all of this. She feels like there's no one to turn to. And then one of the most profound verses of the Bible, one that I love so deeply. In verse 16, Jesus said to her, "Mary." He simply spoke her name, calling to her. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Can you imagine this moment? Life has been at its absolute worst. She thinks she's all alone, but Jesus, he was always right there. She's so overcome by what she's trying to get through that she doesn't realize the truth that Jesus has been there the whole time. And then there's this incredibly meaningful moment where Jesus just calls her name. And when she hears Jesus calling her name, she is transformed. She goes from weeping with grief to crying tears of joy, from separated forever from her friend to reunited. She goes from searching without hope to being fulfilled. In one moment, the unexpected challenges, the unexpected crushing of her grief or of her hope in grief becomes unexpected hope. Could you use some unexpected hope in your life? I don't know what brought you here today. I don't know what you've been living through over this last year, what weight might be holding you down, an opportunity that slipped away. Maybe you feel like a dream has died, or you've lost someone or even multiple people that you just love so dearly. And like Mary, your heart's not just hurting. It might even feel like it's crushed. And sometimes in those moments it can feel like hope is gone. You see, we all live life, and so we live through these moments. I'm not immune. I've lived it too. I remember in my high school and college years watching helplessly as Alzheimer's took my grandma. And I watched my mom desperately trying to cope and trying to care for her mother as she faded away with this awful disease. And through that experience, my mom's worst fear in life, worst fear became that one day she might have Alzheimer's too. And it happened. And once again, as a family, we watched this incredibly awful disease destroy someone that we loved. As we stood by feeling helpless, trying to support her and my dad on this awful journey. We all know that the tragedies of life are universal. They come in different shapes and sizes and varying degrees, but we all experience them. We know that. I know that. But I also know that even in my darkest valley, like Mary, Jesus was there for me. When I had to walk through things that would have crushed me to walk through on my own, I know that God was walking with me. I know there were times that He carried me through that. Things that would break me if I had to face them alone. But I know that with God, I was able to find hope even in the darkest circumstances of life. It still hurts. It's still hard. It can feel overwhelming at times, but it doesn't change the truth that with God, there is no valley too deep, there is no night too dark, and there is no hill too high for God to carry us over. And that's where the unexpected hope of Easter comes from. It is in the presence and the power of God that we find hope. It is not something that we can manufacture. It's not something that we will up inside of us, but that hope is real, it is alive today, and it is available to you. I believe that just like He did with Mary, Jesus is calling your name today. Whether you hear it or not, there is a God who desperately loves you, who created you for a destiny in life, to be His beloved daughter, to be His beloved son. And the hope of Easter that persists today is that by God's power, Jesus was raised from the dead. You know, God went first. God loved you so much. Not God loved just me, or God loved people in general so much, but God loved you specifically so much that He sent His Son Jesus to live the perfect life that neither you or I could ever hope of living. I know I couldn't even dream of doing that, of living up to God's perfect standards. And because of that, there's a separation between us and God. But God sent Jesus to live that perfect life. And understand this, they didn't kill Jesus. Jesus laid down His life for you. And then, by the power of God, He was raised from the grave to life again. And in that, God has created a pathway to restore our relationship with our Heavenly Father. He's created that pathway for you, and I know that He is speaking your name today. That's an incredibly priceless gift, to have our relationship with our Heavenly Father restored, to do what we couldn't do on our own. But God loves you so much, He made it free. And He's offering it today. It seems like we should have to go to incredible lengths. But the gift of grace from God is free. The Bible tells us that if we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord, what does that mean? It could mean things like, Jesus, you're in charge. Jesus, I can't do this on my own. I can't make it. I need your help. All of those things. It doesn't mean I've got to go clean up my life. No, it means I'm trusting Jesus to clean up my life. And then it says, if we believe in our heart, if you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. You will be stepping into the destiny that you have been created for as God's beloved daughter, as God's beloved son. And maybe you can't imagine what that looks like. Maybe that feels a little too abstract. And so, via video, I'd like to introduce to you today my friend Franny, as Franny shares how Jesus was speaking her name. Let's check this out together.
Hi, my name is Franny Valdez, and this is my story. I grew up in a very abusive, chaotic home. For some reason, we still went to church. It wasn't a loving environment. You were there based on religion and your religious duty. That experience made me scared of God. God wasn't anything I wanted anything to do with. He wasn't somebody I wanted to get close to because he was mad at me all the time. So having that type of relationship with God led me to stray away from any kind of relationship, any kind of church. I started to fill that void with bodybuilding and working out. I started competing and started doing shows, and for a little bit it did fill the void. I was happy. I met my husband while I was competing for my show. I was training at the same gym. The more I got into bodybuilding, the more he strayed away. After a year, he ended up leaving, but I continued on my journey to bodybuild and to reach my goal of winning this big show that I had coming up. And I actually ended up winning first place. And on stage, I felt fulfilled. I finally reached this goal and I felt great. And that was on a Saturday. And by Monday, I was totally lost and sad and depressed. What led me to feeling so empty was me realizing that my goal in the end was just an empty goal. There was nothing really of substance there. Once I hit it, it felt like, okay, what's next? This is gonna be the rest of my life. I'm gonna be chasing this feeling forever and ever, and it's never going to fulfill me. I felt completely empty and like my life had no meaning. And I had no idea how to fix it or what to do or where to go from there. Just everything seemed dark. The way God spoke to me was actually through Instagram. I was scrolling on Instagram once and something captured me about this video, and I started listening to it and it really resonated with me. So from that day forward, I started watching sermons online, and one night I listened to one and it just clicked from then on. What really got my attention was God loves everybody. And that was probably one of the first times I heard it and it made sense. All my life I've been told that God's angry because we're not doing what he wants us to do and we're not living this way or that way and we're just messing up all the time. But when he put it that way, I just felt it in my body. It was just a feeling, and it's kind of undescribable. I just prayed out to God, like, please come into my life and take over, because I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know how to handle this life. I don't know what else to do. So ever since that day, I've been on this journey. I've just been on fire for God and learning more about him and trying to understand and build a relationship. I now know what to do when I'm faced with depression and when I'm facing, adversity. I know who I can turn to now. I don't feel alone. It feels like God's on my side. He does love me. I am strong enough to make it through. I don't have to give up on myself. I'm full of life and hopeful and excited about my future.